urge to warn you. Blink disbelieving eyes chill to the bone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wicked Curious Radio. My name is Roxie Zwicker from New England Curiosities, and I am so glad that you joined us today for our Curious Radio show. I am here in the studio with the amazing Ken and the Professor Lou Blassie, who we can't see you on today's broadcast. Lou, are you going to be anonymous?
I don't know.
I mean, there's a little skull there. If you want to be the little skull today, you can.
Well, there's all kinds of stuff going on today. So.
No kidding. So,
as you know, you've been here for an hour. Or so.
I have been here for an hour already. I somehow survived the first and most difficult hour of the day. So everything from here on out should be free and easy breezy. So, of course, I'm gonna have to have it out with you, Lou, as we start the show.
Uh-oh, what happened?
Yep. So
join the club.
I know. So last week we had talked about how we were going to be heading on over to the tiny town of Newton, New Hampshire.
Yes.
To do our Story, Stones, and Superstitions talk, which is all about the haunted cemeteries of New Hampshire. And when I had mentioned that, Lou, you had said there's nobody in Newton.
It's a small town.
Famous last words.
Famous last words.
Are they after me now? Are both of them after me?
It was a melee. It was one of the wildest nights I've had
I saw the
doing
photos.
a
Pandemonium.
talk.
You drew a crowd.
It was pandemonium. There was no parking, there was theft, there was craziness, there were things that were left behind. It was like leaving great woods. It was absolutely crazy. So the evening started out nice enough. The folks in Newton were very gracious and actually treated me to a lovely dinner, and it was a beautiful evening and afternoon, and then it was time to head on over.
Is there a restaurant in Newton, New Hampshire?
No, I was invited to someone's home.
All right.
And
they cooked up a nice.
They made me steak tips from the Haverhill Meat Market, which I didn't even know existed. Apparently, they do great.
Haverhill beef?
Yes, Haverhill beef.
Oh, Haverhill beef is great.
Oh, it was delicious.
Yeah.
It was awesome. They did a nice fresh salad, homemade cookies. So I was like, we're off to a great start. So we caravan down to Newton Town Hall, and immediately as we were coming down the street, there were cars parked on both sides of the street. Pulled up to the town hall. There was nowhere to park. There were just people everywhere. I ended up parking next to the dumpster because there was nowhere for me to go. And I went inside. They were out of chairs. There were so many people that were there.
Congratulate your marketing people, because they did an excellent job.
Yeah, standing room only.
Yeah, definitely standing room only. It was also very nice because they filmed it, so I have to find out from the folks out there where you can actually watch this. I think it's on their local cable access. I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
So they filmed it, and then when the event was over, usually I say to people, if you have any questions, let me know. And I build in a little bit of time in my presentation for that. And I asked people, and they didn't have anything to say. Then all of a sudden, when the crowd broke up, like half of the crowd came up to the podium where I was standing, because people had pictures they wanted to show or stories that they wanted to tell. But across the room, I put out my books and some of my handouts and flyers about the business. And by the time I got done filtering through all the people that had come up to the podium, I noticed that the group from Newton, they were standing around a table, and I'm like, oh, that was great. And they're like, well, not really. It was good, but all my books were stolen.
Oh, my God. Really?
What is that? You're in Town Hall in Newton.
It was, they said
I'm
it
checking
was...
Amazon right now.
I know.
Yeah, right. We'll find him.
I know. Apparently, they went out the door one by one because people thought I was giving them away.
I see.
So, I don't know how that happened because I said, I have information about the tours over there, and I also have books for sale. Like, I use the words for sale. So I'd assume that you would kind of guess that I'm not giving these books away because I have to pay for them. I don't get them free, unfortunately. I wish I did. So the town of Newton was very nice. They actually made up and paid for all the books that were taken, which I thought was really awesome. But that was the first time I had that happen, and they said it
They'll
was.
take it back in taxes. It'll be great.
It all
Get it out of those people.
Oh no!
it all balances
Yeah.
out.
Oh no. So they said, please don't blame the people in Newton that, for the books disappearing, because they had people from all over. We had people come from quite a distance there, and they said it was a
Well,
record.
it was less stolen than a misunderstanding.
Probably. We're not sure, but that's
I'm not sure.
the most likely
Well,
excuse.
unless one person walked out with all of them, it wasn't mass theft.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm very perplexed. I mean, in all the years I've been
Maybe
doing.
it was just a well-executed plan. I don't know.
I don't.
That's it.
Maybe.
Create a diversion. Get the books.
Well, I couldn't see past the crowd that was around me, and I couldn't see the table where
You
my
were-
stuff was, because there was a crowd over there.
Yeah.
You were swarmed.
I was
Literally.
totally swarmed. So of course the first thing I thought of is like, Lou said nobody's in Newton. So it's your fault, Lou. I'm
Came
gonna have
back
to
to
I'm gonna
haunt
have to
her.
I
blame
don't
you.
know how that
It
ended
came-
up being my fault.
Came back to haunt me.
You had people coming in and cross the border to Newton. It wasn't the Newton people.
So
I'll ask you the same question I always ask my kids. So
Yeah.
what did you learn? Don't put your books near the door. One thing.
Security guard, crowd control.
yeah, we're gonna have to have a little bit of crowd. That is the very first time that's ever happened.
Batons and tasers. I'm ready.
Yeah, and they were very, very nice about it and very shocked about it.
Well, I'm sorry for whatever inexplicable part I had in that.
The universe just went to prove you wrong. that's all.
I was just going to say, I think
Yeah.
the universe was just trying to prove you wrong, that there is no one in Newton, New Hampshire. So when all of that happened, I was trying to gather up my computer and everything, and a gentleman had given me this really cool picture from a cemetery in Exeter. His wife was a cemetery commissioner out there.
Oh.
And she had been given, I guess, a picture from the new cemetery commissioner, who it appeared to be a ghost behind a gravestone. And they said they're not like, ghost people. They're
Right.
there to take care of the cemetery. So it was really cool. So they gave it to me in a file folder, and I put that and the check I got for the event on the table as I was packing up. And of course, with all the insanity, I ended up leaving it behind.
Oh, good. Wow.
So I had to email them, and I asked the town, and of course they had it, and they've sent it off to me now. But it was one of the craziest events that I've done in a
was
long
mayhem.
time.
That
It
whole
was.
event was mayhem.
I got home, and I told Ken, I says, I smudged myself when I got in the door. Like, I lit the sage as soon as I got in the house. And
Bathing
I
in
just
the smoke.
I just bathed in the smoke for like 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, so whatever just happened, I just need to come down and relax. It was a really great event. The interest was awesome. The audience was varied, and I did post a picture on the Curiosities Facebook
Yeah,
page.
all right. Yeah.
It was huge. There were actually more people in the pictures you couldn't see off to the sides. I couldn't get them all in. So
They were off to the side talking books.
I think so.
Apparently.
I think so.
Well, they love you in Newton, though. It's just like your third time back at least.
Yeah, it's my third time, and they said that they'll invite me out again. So next,
Of course, free books.
Yeah. We'll have some bouncers this time.
So next time I'll just I'll leave the books in the car until the end or something. And Ken was at work, so he couldn't man the table. Oftentimes, if Ken's around, he'll be able to man the table and kind of
Usually I man
be
the
my
tables, yes.
be my PR person, so to speak. But little tiny town of Newton. Wow, I was exhausted after that.
Oh, so Ken wasn't there because
Oh no, Ken wasn't there.
I've got a text questioning Ken's role in this whole thing.
Unfortunately, I was
You weren't
not there,
Okay,
so
all right.
Yeah.
hard to control the crowd when you're not there.
Yeah. and-
Basically, where was Ken while this was happening? Too?
Yeah, so I think the folks there were a little bit overwhelmed by people were stampeding in and out of the front door. It was just so many people. I was like,
Nice.
wow, it was awesome.
Well,
but-
that's the positive aspect of it.
Well, and
a very nice response.
absolutely, and the whole thing was very positive. But it was just like, wow, this is like the craziest event I think I've ever done.
Did Newton pay wholesale or retail?
They paid retail.
Oh, good. All
They
right.
paid retail. They did the right thing, and
Yeah.
I never would have expected nor asked them that.
I mean, you got the VIP treatment. I mean, you got the car caravan over. You're in the middle like a presidential
you get a police escort?
motorcade.
It felt like it.
Yeah.
I had a car in front of me and one behind me because I wanted to make sure that I didn't get lost and found my way. And again, they were all just very, very gracious hosts.
The town that I'm now living in when
Yeah.
I was younger, I used to drive through it to play hockey, and there was a guy I played hockey with, and it was literally a debate for years whether the town had one cruiser or two. He said they had two, and I said, we've never seen them in the same place, so you can't
Oh.
prove to me that's two, and you never could prove to me there was two.
That's funny
Wow.
because when we go to Newcastle, New Hampshire, we bring our trolley tours through there. They have two police cruisers, and they're different.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they're different.
So at least you can tell them apart.
So yeah, at least you know they
yeah.
do actually have two over
Big
there.
SUV, small SUV.
Yeah, yeah. So that's pretty
I don't know
cool.
if Newton has one.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a Newton Police Department.
Might not be.
And by the way,
I've never seen one.
I have no problem with Newton. This isn't knocking it at all. It's just a small town.
It is. It is.
It's a small
It's
New
like
Hampshire
strictly
town.
residential.
Yeah.
Well,
And they're really into their history and ghosts.
and they are the nicest people over there.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so that was kind of how that went last week, just setting the tone that there's nobody out there, and yet we found that was one of the biggest presentations we've done in a long time.
Nice.
I mean,
Glad to hear it.
you've always had good turnouts there, but this one just was over the top.
It was over the top. So I told them next time I come, build an annex to the building, and we'll hang them from the chandeliers.
I'm going to do it outside under a big tent now.
It's possible the town population doubled during that event.
Yeah, really.
It's highly possible.
It may have. And they also have this great old cemetery behind Town Hall, too. So if you find yourself on one of the many roads to Newton, their cemetery is quite old. It's from the 1700s, and
It's really
it's
cool.
great. It's like this field, and it's set up, which is really cool. You actually have to go up a few steps to go into it. And
nice.
It's very, very nice. Burial ground style, so no real fancy monuments, just rather a lot of beautiful, very old carved gravestones, which is great. So we wanted to share that with everybody, and we have some more events coming further in the season. I'll be in Billerica in October. I'll be in Peabody in October. I'll be in Derry, I think, the beginning of October. So there'll be more events coming up, and as they come up, we'll definitely let you know. And of course, you can go onto our Facebook page and check our events. I think I have them all listed on there. And just so people know, because I actually heard from a couple people after the event that they were very concerned. They said, "Oh, well, I didn't have the extra money to go." Any of the events typically that I do, town hall and libraries, they're all free to attend. So if budget is an issue, and I know it was for a couple of people for this week, and they didn't go because they thought there was a cost,
Yep.
there is no cost. Usually there's a sponsor or the town or the library will pay for me to be there, so that way people can attend for free. So
Yeah, libraries generally don't charge.
Yeah, libraries
so,
generally-
So come along.
yeah, historical societies, if I do an event with them, they may ask for a donation, but again, that's always optional. So I felt bad that a couple people had missed this event because I thought there was a cost associated with it. So I wanted to put that out there.
I thought Billerica was fictitious until 5 years ago. I knew it
Don't-
existed.
It doesn't exist.
Don't
I knew it
set the
existed,
tone
but I'd
for
never
it.
been. And then my son was in the marching band at Andover High and went to a football game and go, hey, Billerica actually does exist.
Oh no! Now watch. We're going to go out there and like 5,000 people show up.
Well, that's a good-sized town. Yeah, you're going to draw.
Well, and they too have a great old cemetery and kind of quintessential New England village there. The white churches and stuff, very, very pretty. So, so that'll be coming up in October. And luckily now we know it exists. Thanks for that, Lou. We
Yep.
appreciate that. Very good.
It is there.
And the best football food in the Cape Ann League, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, see, now
They
you
have a
need to
very
know
good
these
snack
things.
shack, yeah.
Oh, see, you need to know.
And that's important. You want to eat well when you're at a game.
Yep.
So we thought that we would share a few of the stories from the presentation that we did in Newton. As I mentioned, it was Story Stones and Superstitions of New Hampshire, and it was about some of the strange graveyard lore. And we opened the presentation with some questions that we always get from people when they come out on our cemetery tours. And when we talk about cemeteries like the Point of Graves along the waterfront being from 1671, some people often ask a very interesting question that, well, if Portsmouth was founded in 1623 and their cemetery is from 1671, where's everybody
Where's
that
everybody else?
that died? Did they all survive to 1671? And people ask us
Dump
that
them in the
question.
ocean, the river.
Yeah, where did they go?
It is a port town.
Well, the river has been used for many things over the years. We know that for a fact. But one of the things I think people don't realize is initially our first burial grounds were right where people were living. So
Right.
you were buried right on your property. And there's evidence of that as you go all throughout New England. And another question people will ask to that point is, So why did they put a cemetery in the Taco Bell parking lot in Somersworth? I said, what do you think came first?
That's not the way it works.
The Taco Bell
Yeah.
or the cemetery? I mean, the cemetery is clearly 19th century.
You have
Maybe
to
they
think
got a
that one
tax
through. You have to think that one through.
You do have to think that through, but that's a question that I swear I get probably at least once or twice a year. Why is there a cemetery in the Taco Bell?
Yeah, or the
parking lot?
Starbucks in Portsmouth.
Or the Starbucks in Portsmouth. Why is there
There's
a cemetery there?
There's
And
a cemetery at the Starbucks in Portsmouth.
there is.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and it's also 19th century.
But it was there first.
And I think we forget that people were buried right where they lived. So we lose a lot of people here in New England because sometimes, those stones are removed for further construction. And when we look at all of this, this modern, kind of mini mall sprawl that we get, they just move right around the gravestones. Like they put that stuff there and make those cemeteries as small as possible to do their construction. So when we're looking at Portsmouth, a lot of those original settlers, we don't know where they are now. And of course, our first gravestones really weren't stones as we're used to. Sometimes they were just wooden planks or field stones, just simple rocks placed over the graves. Mm-hmm. So we lose people in that respect too. If you want to find the oldest family cemetery, it's out on Ordeon Point, and it's out in the woods. So that is officially the oldest cemetery in the state of New Hampshire, but it's just a little family plot. So we look at the point of graves as being more of a common burying ground, something that was used for the community. So yes, people, of course, passed away up until 1671. We don't know where they are all buried on the seacoast, and they probably still could be in someone's backyard. So it's funny when people ask that question.
I was talking to an excavator in Newburyport because they were digging out for a foundation or addition to an old house, and they turned up the cistern, brick cistern in there.
Sure.
And I was asking about it, and they were telling stories like you can't dig anywhere here in the sea. You can't dig anywhere without coming up with something interesting.
Did he talk about finding any bones or anything?
Oh yeah, he came up with bones. He says basically we can't dig anywhere without coming up with something.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's more common than not, and when you go back and you look at some of the town history books, and it lists there was a cemetery plot on this street or that street, and you go by and there's nothing there, and you can see modern construction's now taken place, and you're like, well, they're down there somewhere.
See, I just assumed the bodies were moved when burial places, at least public burial places, would turn into buildings, but that's not the case. They
No,
not at all. In fact, in the town of York,
just added some fill, and here we go.
basically, they had their founders' burying ground, which was a little bit closer to York Beach, and the decision was made, and we got this right from the woman at the Historical Society who was alive when it happened. They were going to build some summer homes, and they just tilled under. She said you could go by, she says, and see the till of the remains that were there, and then they just poured some slab foundations, and that was that.
Didn't even
It wasn't even a
twice.
thought. It wasn't even a
Well,
thought.
that's the other thing we tend to forget is that there was a while when they were just burying bodies. There was no coffin. There was no.
That's right.
Yeah,
certainly
maybe
no concrete
wrap them in fabric
housing or
at
anything.
least, maybe, but.
No, and it's funny. Even to that, one of the stories that I told, and I'll post a picture of it because I actually just found a picture a couple of weeks ago in the town of Hancock, New Hampshire. They had the community coffin, and it was for people basically who couldn't afford to have a coffin, so they bury you in a cloth. So a lot of these burials, you'll find that there are no coffins, and somehow the coffin made it over to a local farmer who was feeding his chickens out of it. And, those thrifty New Englanders and the historical...
So this was a coffin that they used, for the wake or something, and then they just buried them? Or?
Well, yeah, they would carry the body to the cemetery in the coffin, then take it out.
Dump 'em out,
And
Here you go.
Roll them out?
Right in the hole. Take the coffin back. You didn't pay for this one, buddy.
that's terrible. Well, that's awful.
Practical New Englanders.
That's
No,
right.
it's
Thrifty.
true.
Yeah.
Thrifty New Englanders. So, they had this wooden coffin that they continued to use. And at some point, local farmer thought it was just the right height to fill with chicken feed to feed his chickens.
Yeah.
So the historical, why not? The Historical Society wanted the coffin back, and he says, "Well, I'm not going to give you the coffin back unless you build me a chicken feeder."
Seems fair.
Fair bargain.
He needed,
Guys running a business here.
he needed a trough.
Yeah.
He needed a trough, so
Chicken's got to eat.
they built him a chicken feeder, and they got the coffin back. The coffin was on display for a few years, and it's actually right now it's in Concord, Massachusetts, in the museum. The old Hancock reusable coffin there, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, in Concord for some reason.
Yeah, in Concord. So yeah. So
Was this common practice, or were the people of Concord rather ingenious?
of Hancock.
Hancock, I'm sorry.
Hancock. It was actually fairly common because not everybody could afford a coffin. I think we've talked about in the past the chief funeral expense was actually hard cider and rum. So it was alcohol, and people
Yep.
were spending all their money on alcohol
Had
at
to
the
keep them
funerals of the
lubed up.
deceased.
Yes, I think that's good policy.
The commentary over here.
Well, that way you could get them to carry the coffin because they didn't have a cart or a wagon a lot of times.
Right. So with that, there wasn't always money left for a coffin.
Yeah.
So a lot of towns, they had community cloths that they would
Yeah, they
place
say a
over.
funeral is for the living, not for the dead.
No,
Really?
Yeah.
and there's definitely truth to that. So it wasn't that uncommon. Plus, you'd find when they were burying people in like the big burial chambers or in the tombs, they didn't want to use coffins because the coffins took up too much space.
Yep.
So rather, what they chose to do was to just kind of shelf the people in there and just wrap them in cloth and put them on shelves to make the most of the space. So coffins weren't always used in burial situations.
Yeah, so sometimes they're buried in layers, which is really odd.
So something to think about. And also a friend of ours who lives out in Lebanon, Maine, talking about, where people were buried and how they got lost. She bought her house in the 1980s, and she's very open to the whole spiritual aspect of things, and she was hoping that she might find a house somewhere near a cemetery. And this house, which was built in the 80s, she ended up finding and bought it, and come to find out when she was walking the property one day, way down off in the woods, she had found some gravestones laying in a pile. And she had already started seeing the ghost of a man who was walking on the other side of the stone wall, who would walk across the stone wall, yet there was a hill on the other side, so he never seemed to be going down the hill. He just
Right.
seemed to be going across the wall. So she went to the Historical Society, and they said, there used to be a cemetery somewhere in your front yard. They had this little map of it from somewhere around the 1800s.
Oh, how interesting.
Well, she decided that she was going to contact the real estate agent and say, well, what did you know about this? Were these gravestones somewhere out front? And the real estate agent admitted taking the gravestones out of the ground and putting them out behind the house, because they were
Wow.
afraid that somebody might not want to buy the house if they knew there was a cemetery in the front yard.
Isn't that a legalized disclosure, or not necessarily?
I don't know about back in the 80s.
There was,
but
there,
maybe
yeah,
now.
there was no repercussions for this whatsoever.
Wow.
Again, times change, and it wasn't
Yeah.
like that even just 30 years ago.
So what she decided to do was to go out to the woods, take the gravestones, and they're big gravestones. I got pictures of
They're
them
like
somewhere.
5 feet tall.
Yeah, they're
big.
huge slate stones, and they've got willows and urns. I think there was at least a couple of footstones and probably 4 or 5 headstones, and she couldn't figure out exactly where they went in the front yard. Her yard is huge. She lives way down off a dirt road. So what she decided to do was just to lean them up against some of the trees there in homage to, these
Yeah.
folks that are there. And her house still remains haunted to this day, and you could certainly draw a parallel and say, maybe it has something to do with the gravestones being moved. Could be something else. But that was actually quite frequent, and I had posted on our Facebook page probably about 2 weeks ago. There was a man in Connecticut who was a man in New York who was cleaning out his garage, and he found a gravestone from Connecticut in his garage, and the gravestone was from the 1700s.
Didn't know it was there.
So he's in New York, and the gravestone's from Connecticut. So he managed to contact some folks in Connecticut, and they were able to find out the cemetery that the gravestone came from. And now he's bringing the gravestone back, but he has no idea how it ended up in his garage. So, personally,
Somebody wanted it.
yeah, I wouldn't want that, that juju on my head of having, somebody's gravestone in my garage. And he said, he's lived there for years and never saw it. He was cleaning out his garage, and it was behind a whole bunch of stuff. So, and it looked beautiful. It was in absolutely perfect condition.
Previous owner was a relative of somebody, or
That could be.
don't know. It certainly.
We don't know.
maybe
Yeah.
they lost a stone in the divorce settlement. Who knows?
She's not getting this.
Oh no.
I can see those sour grapes.
Yeah, I could totally see that too. So what we'll do is we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll tell you some more cemetery stories. You're listening to Wicked Curious, and stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Diana made it for all kinds of people.
For the best in curious entertainment, you have to check out New England Curiosities. Located in the historic city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, New England Curiosities offers tales and tours of folklore, ghosts, and mysterious history. With author and historian Roxie Zwicker, New Hampshire's longest-running and original ghost tour. Roxie has been entertaining the locals, visitors from away, and curious souls since 1994. New England Curiosities has been offering tours and special haunted events since 2002. Highly respected and thoroughly entertaining. You'll be talking about your experience for months to come. Discover why New England Curiosities is consistently on top of travel and tourism lists. Yankee Magazine calls the Shadows and Stones Graveyard Tour one of New England's top 5 cemetery tours. The Boston Globe says an experience with New England Curiosities is one of the 3 best alternatives to visiting Salem, Massachusetts. From scenic trolley rides to walking tours and speaking engagements, there's something for everyone. So join New England Curiosities and experience why they are consistently featured in the media, including television appearances on the History Channel and the Travel Channel. Check out the latest legendary tours and events from New England Curiosities at newenglandcuriosities.com. And be sure to like New England Curiosities on Facebook.
Diana made it for all kinds of people. One of the man's. Diana, one of the kinds.
Welcome back to Wicked Curious Radio. You are finding us on the net, New England Talks, 102.9 FM HD2, and Facebook Live. I am your scary godmother, Roxie Zwicker from New England Curiosities, here with Professor Lou Blassie and the amazing Ken.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to mention very briefly is on our website for New England Curiosities, if you go down to the bottom of the front page, you will actually see that I have a link for Wicked Curious. All of our shows are on that page, so all you simply have to do is click over to the page. The description for each show is there, so if you're looking for a particular topic or an area that we've talked about, I have all of that listed on there. It took me about 2 days to, to break all that down and put that out there. However, I'm going to continue to add the shows out there as well. And now that I've got everything downloading and all of those details, I'm going to go ahead and start putting those out so we can download those onto iTunes. And we came up with a really cool handout for all of our tours now too. So if you come out on a tour, we'll give you a little handout for this radio show so you can find us as well. And on top of that, if that wasn't enough, one of the things I'm going to be doing is kind of re-editing and re-engineering this show. So every single show is going to be broadcast on PPM TV, Portsmouth Community Comcast 98 on the Seacoast. So what I'll be doing is editing in some of the pictures that from the places that we've talked about on the shows as well. So there's like a whole lot of stuff going on behind the scenes.
Nice.
Always.
And that's the thing, you know, people come out with us for like, you know, an hour and a half and they're like, oh, wow, you know, this is great. It's so cool you get to do this. You know, you get to have all the rest of your time. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, do you have any idea, like, what goes on behind the scenes to run New England Curiosities and to do all this stuff?
Chase down book thieves. You get all kinds of
I know.
Put it in the APB.
I know, it's true. And the sad thing is I don't have any books left now. Like, now I got to reorder books for my next event, which my next big event we had talked about last time was PSO, the Portsmouth Symphony Orchestra.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a great event.
It's coming together nicely.
I'm super excited. August 19th at the Little Harbor Church. You can find out more information about it at pso.org, Portsmouth Symphony Orchestra, and
And it's affordable.
Yeah, it's
And be telling stories in front of a symphony orchestra. Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Accompanied by.
Yeah, accompanied by. It's their chamber music series, and I am just super excited. We actually exchanged some emails this past week in regards to the format of the show and the costuming and the theming behind it, and they are just really super excited about it. So I have to keep kind of pinching myself, telling me that it's coming up in just about 3 weeks. So I'm like I said, I'm just super excited to kind of bring a whole different layer of New England Curiosities out there with just amazing music behind us, and we're going to be just pretty much outside a cemetery in a beautiful historic church.
Nice.
So that's
That's going to be a
upcoming.
great event.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
It's really going to be cool. Yes, it is.
It is, and we're also going to film it as well. So we'll have it's as much of the event that we can share with people too, because I don't know when it's going to happen again. So I wanted to continue our conversation on cemetery stories again, since we're just coming off of the presentation that we did in Newton. All the cemetery tales are rather fresh. And one of the other things that I think a lot of people didn't realize in just kind of cemeteries in general is how many gravestones have been stolen. So we've talked about gravestones being moved and kind of gravestones being buried, but there's an article that I show in my presentation, and it's from the Boston Globe long about the mid-1980s, and it describes how there was this fascination with going and taking gravestones and turn them into coffee tables.
Yeah.
And
Really?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's kind of odd.
Yeah, it is really odd. And they cited
Boundaries, people, boundaries.
Yeah, really.
really, I can't even imagine, here, have this cocktail on this gravestone for somebody that's buried in town. So the article chronicled thefts being basically some of the most from Portsmouth at the North Cemetery and at the Point of Graves, and antique shops. Now, again, 1980s, we're getting upwards of $4,000 for a large-size gravestone.
Wow.
An average of $4,000.
Wow.
So the evidence of that is pretty obvious when you go to a cemetery like the Point of Graves, where they did a survey of the grounds in 1908, which said there was about 200 gravestones at the time. Today, there's roughly 125 that are in there. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have, wind, weather, and time that's taking its toll on the gravestones, so you know that they're crumbling away on their own.
Right.
But you also know that some were taken. In addition, it says some were taken by descendants. So, can you imagine, going to see, dear grandma's grave and say, you know what, I really don't feel like going to the cemetery anymore, so I'm going to take her with me. I'm going to take a gravestone.
Yeah.
And that was happening at the same time. The same article cites that as an issue for missing gravestones as well. So
And then they made great-great-grandma Mahedable into a coffee table?
I don't
Go
understand.
to the mill stores, buy legs and everything, and put it all together?
It bothers me. I don't know. It just...
It's not right.
It's not right, and I don't even know how
So there's
somebody
no
could have the notion.
implications for an antique store with a gravestone?
There should
There
be.
is now.
Yeah.
There are laws, and that came about in the 1990s. So, again, consider 1970s, 1980s, and even at the time when these cemeteries were overgrown, there was, a time when the Point of Graves wasn't a place you'd walk through.
Right.
It was just, it was the old cemetery nobody used. And, that's when we lost stones. I think probably one of the biggest culprits is right down in Boston. You go to Copp's Hill Burying Ground, and they found dozens of gravestones covering up drains in people's basements. and
Foundations.
they were used in the foundation. If the field stones needed some additional support, they were putting gravestones in there. They were reusing the coffins. So all that stuff just really creeps me out.
Reusing coffins?
They're reusing coffins. You haven't heard the story of reusing coffins
No.
at the Copp's Hill Burying Ground? So we're back in late 1800s, and there is a book about the Copp's Hill Burying Ground out there, and I actually was researching it when I was writing my Haunted Cemeteries of New England book, which is floating around here somewhere. And there was a woman who was constantly visiting the same grave of a relative who had passed away, and she noticed one day that at the edge of the cemetery was this pile of dirt-covered coffins, and she described as having hair and skin fragments hanging out of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the gravedigger was burying people then going back and taking all of the coffins and then dumping all of the bodies in a great big hole adjacent to the cemetery. This is factual stuff. This is like,
Shenanigans.
yeah. This is not, conjecture or legend. So that was one of the main reasons why they started looking into what was going on at Copp's Hill Burying Ground, and they discovered that gravestones were being recarved, gravestones were being stolen, and they were repurposing graves that were over there. And there's still some evidence of that today. If you look at some of the stones, you'll see that names were scratched out and other names were carved over them.
Holy cow! Wow.
So there's some other scary stuff aside from the ghost stories in our New England cemeteries. Just the way they treated the
real
cemeteries
horrors, yeah.
themselves. Yeah,
The real horrors.
Yeah, the real horrors of it. So I always like to let people know when they come to the presentations that, sometimes even if you're not a big believer in ghosts, and I always ask at the beginning of the presentation, who believes, who doesn't believe, just to kind of get a gauge of the audience. And I'm like, you know what, you don't have to believe in ghosts to find some scary stuff in our cemeteries and the way we treated them. And of course, when we went up to Vermont, and I'm not sure if I had mentioned this story several years ago, we had stopped at a little towny museum, and we were actually looking for a cemetery and for a particular gravestone for a woman who had lost 12 children. And the gravestone had all of the 12 children's names on it, and then a face for each child. Every time she gave birth to pretty much a stillborn child or a child that lived a day or two. And she kept trying and kept trying. And,
Yeah, talk about unlucky.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine. So there were 12 children on one gravestone with her, and then another one for an additional child that she had had.
That actually grew to a young age.
Yeah,
and still passed.
I don't even think they made it to 10.
Yeah, but he was the only one that lived that long.
Correct.
Out of all her children.
Correct. So
That's 13 pregnancies.
Yes.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I will post that.
It was much more common back in the day, obviously.
Well, families were bigger. You needed a bigger family.
That's a decade of being pregnant.
I know.
Yes.
And she was, I want to say, maybe 42, 43 when she passed away. She was not an old woman when she died, and she died in childbirth.
Well,
Yeah, it was their last one there.
I think one or two of her births were twins. So,
Yeah, okay.
that breaks down the pregnancy a little bit less, but still, that's a lot.
It's a one of a kind gravestone. It's pretty famous in Vermont.
Yeah, it's
It's definitely worth finding.
yeah, a bit out in the woods there, and I'll bring up all that information and
When you brought it up,
post
I was thinking she lost 12 kids at once, but I don't know, this is worse.
Yeah, one right
Yeah.
after another. They didn't make it beyond a couple of days, and then she
You
was
think
right,
after
right back at it.
The
a
town
few
should
losses.
get a new doctor.
Yeah, right. You'd think after a few losses she would have gave up, but she didn't.
So on that trip when we were going to find her gravestone, we actually stopped in town, and again, kind of one of those weird things. There was a gentleman who was standing out in front of one of the buildings there.
Historical Society, right?
Yep, and I was just going to say that. But that's okay. So I was leading up to it. Ken's like right in there again. So we had pulled over, and we noticed that he was standing in front of the Historical Society, oddly enough, and he was getting ready to close up, and we had asked him about the gravestone, and he was one of her descendants in the family. Like,
Wow.
I could not believe it. Like
Small town.
six generations away from her, he knew exactly what we were talking about.
Surprised she had any descendants.
Me too. Me too. So when we went inside the museum, he says, "Oh, if you want to check it out," because we told him, we're writing cemetery books and all of that. So he let us in. We went inside, and they had, some really cool stuff. But they had a glass display case that was full of footstones with names and initials on it. And we're like, so, what are you guys doing with all these footstones? Like, why aren't they in the cemetery with the people? And of course, there's a lot of stories about you remove the footstones to fit somebody else in to make more space. In fact, we just went over to the cemetery in Derry, and they have pallets of footstones in the cemetery.
They're
Really?
just in stacks.
Yeah, they're
over
just
by the
in
wall.
stacks, and I'll post
to
those
create
pictures
more
too,
room.
just to make more room. So in Vermont, though, they weren't pulling them out to make more room. They were pulling them out because they brought them home and put them next to the hearth or the fireplace and warmed them up, and then brought them up and used them as bed warmers.
Oh, I
Put
thought
them
it was
under the sheet.
sentimental.
No, put them under the covers.
No, to warm up the cold beds in Vermont.
It's cold in Vermont,
It's cold
They
in
couldn't
there.
find any more granite in Vermont? Would they run out of granite?
I don't know. They ran out of marble, I guess.
Marble, yeah.
Yeah, they ran out of marble.
So
So
you were just talking to them in Vermont, they got tons of marble.
they do.
Yeah.
They do. But they wanted to, these were just the right size. They were just big enough for
Yeah.
you to warm up and to carry upstairs and to warm up your beds. So I always tell people, if you're booking a cute little romantic bed and breakfast in Vermont, some of them still have them by the fireplace. We've actually been to a couple of them,
Little B&Bs.
and they're still there. They keep them.
Well,
They come with the house.
Yeah, they just, I don't know. So yeah,
I
so
can't imagine. Oh, it's a cold day. What can we do? Oh, don't have a good enough bed warmer. Run up the cemetery and bring that home for me, boy.
yeah, that conversation. What was that conversation?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. So
This sounded like a good idea.
other scary
Was Marvel
things.
particularly suited to this, or
It was because it held the heat.
yeah?
So it would be something, you could easily handle and carry up the stairs, wrap it in cloth, and then bring it back downstairs and heat it back up.
Probably inexpensive to take it from a cemetery.
Oh, I'm
Didn't have
sure.
to pay for it.
I'm sure.
It was already there.
It's marble. You can't swing a dead cat in Vermont without hanging marble.
This is true.
That is very true. So, like I said, sometimes you don't need the ghost stories in the cemeteries. And
Yeah.
The fact that they took the footstones, does that mean that it's going to disturb the dead and there's going to be some sort of spiritual upheaval going on there? Again, you can't say, and I don't know. But for me, it's just like, okay, so it's one more reason potentially why someone might not want to be in their grave, because now you've got their footstone. And footstones are hard to put back because you only have sometimes initials on the footstone. Sometimes you just have a year. So how do you figure out where they go?
Right.
Once they're gone, they're gone. And the ones we saw at Derry a couple of weeks ago, there must have been, I'd say, probably at least 100 on two pallets.
If not more.
Oh,
yeah.
And then they were stacked on the stone wall and
Oh, there were
all over
there
the
were
place.
even more.
This reshapes my assumptions about our relationship with death, and because you thought back in the day the Puritans would be very respectful of graves in general, and but they weren't particularly respectful of graves.
Well, it depends. I mean, initially in New England, they were, and burial grounds were just places to put the dead. As time went on, when those cemeteries were full and you're moving into the 19th century, people are looking at these old cemeteries as, whatever supplies they needed.
Right.
They'd go down and get. So I don't think you would find, the Puritans and the early colonists using gravestones in their home, because death was something that they really feared and was part of their everyday life because
The
it was
early
so much more
1800s,
common.
it's
But
like, whatever you need.
yeah, whatever you need, go on down and get what you need right from your local cemetery. And that
Remember,
is
those people have been dead 100 years. at that
Or
point.
more, yeah.
right. And in some cases, their descendants had moved on to other towns and communities, settled elsewhere, and cemeteries were treated a lot differently back then.
So you could see, nobody's going to miss this. It's been here 150 years. Just going to take it.
And
The family's gone.
That's just
Still not right.
a very unsettling thought to me that even, like I said, even without the ghost stories, there are all these other stories about the cemeteries, where they let animals graze in the burial grounds because it kept the grass down and made it easier for them to maintain. So that's why you'll find a lot of the grounds are very uneven. I know there was also another story about Copp's Hill that I had written about in my book, and people were on a cemetery tour there, and they stood on top of one of the old tombs, which if you're in a cemetery, you really don't want to stand on, you don't want to touch, you really don't want to touch these stones because they're so old. And they stood on top of a tombstone for a long, kind of a flat slab of stone, and they fell through.
Yeah.
It gave way. So
Sure.
I mean,
Imagine that.
these are they're old crumbling relics. So I don't know. I always tell people
That
to
must have been a
tread
fun
lightly.
afternoon.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how an experience like that is just falling into this big tomb.
Literally falling in.
Yeah, not my thing. So, like I said, tread very lightly when you're out there in the cemeteries, and there's all these different stories. And I mean, what I know is just a fraction of what's out there as far as how our cemeteries were treated over the years and what they've become and how they look today. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have such a reverence for a cemetery like the Point of Graves or some of our oldest 17th century cemeteries, because they managed to survive all this. I mean, every stone's a miracle that it's in there.
The first half of the 19th century, I was tempted to use the word pragmatic, but I think that glorifies it. It was a gritty period.
Oh, most indeed was.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a lot of social graces anymore.
No, that really didn't come until much later. And you would think, at that point, after the American Revolution, there would be this sort of movement to building America and really kind of taking hold of the land that was here. And I don't know, you can see it in the cemeteries of what was going on there. It was a time called the Great Awakening, but still, things were changing, not always for the better. Particularly, when you look at Portsmouth and their African burying ground, there was a cemetery that existed for 100 years. Then at some point, early 1800s, same time frame, they're like, you know what? There's no gravestones there. We know people are buried there, but we're just going to build our houses on top of it. And you've got an entire block of Portsmouth, and underneath it is about 300-400 people.
And that happened a lot.
It is. It's incredibly common.
More common than we think.
Well, they weren't going to leave the land, and they weren't going to move people. They would,
Yeah, it was probably too much work, and they didn't have modern equipment, so there probably was a pragmatic reason sometimes, in their eyes.
I don't know. I don't see that reason myself.
No.
If you,
it was the easy way to go. That's the reason.
Best case scenario is there was the family plot, because a lot of these places were farms and homesteads, and they built around them, which is when you get the cemeteries just here and there next to Taco Bell.
Yeah, but I mean, this is in Portsmouth. This is a huge burying ground. It's the largest colonial African burying ground today in the United States,
right.
And it's underneath 2 streets of our city. And when they discovered it, we say discovered in 2004 because it had been dug up before, they finally decided to mark it. But you can tell in 1900 when you look at the site survey photographs that it actually shows that when they laid water lines on Court Street, they didn't care. The water lines go right through the coffins and right through the remains.
Yeah.
And you can see that in the photo. So, attitudes about cemeteries and
Right
the respect.
through the coffin.
Right through the coffins.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like sectioned in half with a big pipe going through, and there's half the skeleton and coffin here and half down there.
So they clearly were laying the pipe on top of the coffin.
Yeah.
And you can see that. Spirits care about it. I might tend to think that they do because that's all that they have left, of their connection in this world. Really, when you stop and think about it, what are you leaving behind in this world when you die? Is a gravestone, a tree? Maybe you're going to be buried out to sea. There's not going to be a whole lot left to say that you were here.
What was the time period they were building over this?
It's
African.
So the cemetery was established in 1705, and they started building in the early 1800s, so just about 100 years later.
Yeah. You wonder what the relationship was with African Americans at that point, and whether that changed their attitudes about.
They judged it was an African burying ground. Maybe at the time, the senses and sensibilities, they didn't care. They're like, we're just going to build over it.
Well, and it wasn't a cemetery like our others in the city that had gravestones and paths and more information about it. It was just this basically ground that looked like there wasn't a whole lot going on. Maybe that was enough for them to say, well, nobody's going to forget this. Let's just keep building our houses.
I mean, fieldstone markers, maybe at best.
Yeah, if there was anything, it might be a fieldstone marker. So I'm not sure as far as why we have so many ghosts.
Fascinating.
But I definitely have my theories as to why we have so
So
many.
you think
ghosts.
spirit is? I probably just addressed it, but spirit. I never understood why spirit would be attached to their burial place.
Well, I don't think that it's so much attached to the burial place, but the burial place, to me, represents the memory of them walking this earth.
So
That they
it's a
were
place
here.
of remembrance where people would go and
Right.
visit.
So it's to me it has that energetic connection. Even though largely in colonial England you didn't go to the cemetery and visit a grave regularly. That was more of kind of a Victorian thing that led us into what we do today as a practice.
Right.
But that's the relic of that
That's
person.
the misunderstanding I had growing up Catholic and Italian Catholic and Irish Catholic. It's like they 10 gravestones and show up there and go, yeah, nobody's there. I mean, do your remembrances, but I don't know.
I don't
Going
know.
out to the graveyard on Saturday afternoon and planting flowers, I don't know.
I think from a spirit standpoint, I mean, why couldn't you go there and remember them so that memory could call them to you, just even for that short period of time?
I agree, and a lot. We're lucky in Portsmouth because we still have a lot of houses, that date back to the 16 and 1700s of people that live there. But in a lot of communities, you don't. Places like Portland, Maine, where most of their original homes burned to the ground in their 19th century fire. There's really nothing left but their gravestones of these people to say where they were. And again, you can debate it all day long until the end of the day. But to me, just in the work that I do, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yep.
Well, that's another example of Portland where the founders are lost because of progress.
Well, and same thing. It was the 19th century after, their Great Fire that was up there. It was incredibly devastating, just like Portsmouth. 300 buildings burned to the ground and many people displaced and homeless. And there's some amazing pictures from the archives of just showing the devastation of Portland, Maine.
Fire safety wasn't a thing back in the day.
Well, no, I mean,
It wasn't.
you lived in a house with, just an open fireplace.
that's
You
it.
cooked over fire. Everything was done over fire. So after Portland's Great Fire happened, of course they had to rebuild, and the decision was made. Their huge cemetery called the Eastern Cemetery, just as old as the Point of Graves, 17th century, where their founders were in that burial ground, which was in the back. As the cemetery grew, it got newer and newer towards the front. They made the decision to dig out the entire back of the cemetery, founders and all, and dump them in the back cove and dump them in holes from the houses that had burned down as fill. And that's no secret in the city of Portland, that the founders are no longer at the Eastern Cemetery, that they're buried all over the city, and there's now a retaining wall to hold in the back of the cemetery where they were all dug out.
And it's a neighborhood right outside that wall.
Yeah, and there's a neighborhood right there, and their bodies and the fill were used throughout the city of Portland.
Were they
So they're everywhere.
dug out? Ceremony is the wrong word, but were they dug out?
No.
They just took a bunch of fill out and mixed it up and
Yeah.
dumped it
No
in the,
honoring.
No honoring,
Wow.
no list of names.
Yeah.
So when you
The
go,
city's founders now.
It's
city's
unfa-
founders,
It's unfathomable now, isn't it? To
It really
think about
is,
it.
Yeah.
and you go around Portland, like Portsmouth, has lots and lots of ghost stories, and you have your founders sprinkled throughout the town to use fill that they decided to build on to rebuild the city of Portland. Portland's largely Victorian, and it's an incredible example of gorgeous Victorian architecture. But underneath those houses are your founders. They've found bones in the back cove dating back a couple hundred years, and they surmise they came from the cemetery up there on the hill.
But just fill, just a pile of dirt with some founders here and there. And,
Skull here, bone there,
yeah,
ribs.
so like mulch.
wow.
Yeah, and
to
I
fill
just,
in the mess.
I don't understand, and I think that's one of the reasons why every opportunity I get to talk about it or write about it in my books, I try to let people know, what it was like. I mean, today, of course, this would never happen. Whenever they find a grave, it's a big deal, and everybody's trying to do the right thing. And Portsmouth has done the right thing and made amends to a degree.
Well, that massive growth for the city has changed now today. Like 200 years ago, Portland or Portsmouth or Newburyport or Salem, those cemeteries were near churches that were close to town, but town has basically grown over them, expanded out over them.
Oh, it has.
Right.
And right now you'll find the most development in Portsmouth in the North End. And the North Cemetery is over there, and of course it'll be well preserved, but it was some years ago, there was a cemetery in the North End. They just picked the whole thing up and moved it across town.
At least they moved it.
So at least they moved that one.
Yeah.
But had it been 100 years previous, they might have built right over it.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't surprise me when you hear about, somebody was dug up when they were building an on-ramp. It's because somebody was there.
What do you think ongoing our relationship with burial is going to be with cremation and other things that might come up? Is burial a dying,
For lack of a better term, I know.
for lack of a better term,
progressive.
dying procedure or ceremony?
I think it is, because we're running out of space, and a measurement of that is just even our own production of trash right now. Where are we putting all our trash? There's so much conversation being had about what we're doing as far as a society. We have to start recycling, and I think that's now starting to move to the burials of people as well. Is we're going to have to be smart about that. There's 7 billion people on this planet right now. When colonial New England started, it's just so very few
Yeah.
people that were here. in another 50 years, where are half of these people going to be buried?
I have no interest in being buried. What's your now? You've given a lot of thought to this. What's your relationship with? Do you want to be buried?
Initially that was my thought, but I'm really interested in, the forests that they're doing right now with somebody that passes away, making them into a tree. And using them as
those biopod things.
Yeah, with their agreement.
Makes sense, yeah.
As long as I'm agreeing to that, and that's my wish is to have that. A possibility of trees, because trees are going to give more oxygen to the environment. I think it's a natural way of being. So I think that's what I'm thinking of. Anything's possible, though.
Does that create that sort of lasting impression on the earth that you think Spirit is looking for?
For me, I think it does.
Anchor, yeah.
I think it does, because and that's another thing that I point out is when you go into the cemeteries and you see the trees that are there, what do you think's feeding the trees?
Yeah.
But it's all the decay and decomposition that's going on in the cemetery. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a conversation that is being had more and more often today, because people are trying to contemplate what to do with their deceased. And I think there are more options now than ever, and it might be something to consider. So, with that, something to consider is how quickly this show goes by. So, I did want to mention just very quickly, because we managed to go up to Augusta yesterday. We went to this great holistic expo, which I really don't have time to go and visit a lot of events. Usually I'm on the other side of the table. And when I got home, checking out the crystals that I had, I did want to mention how I've forgotten that you can actually mine for your own crystals in the state of New Hampshire at the Moat Mountain Range just outside of North Conway. So since we didn't have a road trip segment to this week's show, I mean, we've given you a few cemetery stories. Yeah. I did want to mention, if you go, 4 miles west of North Conway, you're going to find Moat Mountain. If you are looking for smoky quartz or various quartz stones and mica, there's a huge deposit that's open to the public, and you can quarry your own that's up there. Wow. And all you have to do is just bring your tools and follow the trails up the mountain. The views are beautiful. I have a huge chunk of smoky quartz and feldspar that comes from the area. So if you're looking for something to do and you're up in the North Conway area, you can actually go and mine your own crystals up there, and there's no cost. You just, you want to take minimal. You don't want to empty the place out. Right. But go up and check it out. It's one of the coolest things that you can go and mine for your own crystals.
What are the qualities of these crystals?
They're top quality.
No, I mean in terms of... crystals bring certain sort of energies, don't they?
They do. So smoky quartz is one of the reasons why they call it smoky quartz is because it's believed to have absorbed all the negative energy. So smoky quartz absorbs any negativity that's around you. That's what makes it smoky versus clear. Clear quartz that you'll find up there is an energy amplifier. So if you're looking to raise your vibration,
sized one right here, right. In this room.
Need one on either side of the table, right? Yeah. So smoky quartz is great for dispelling negativity, and quartz is great for raising your energy if you want to connect with spirit, or if you're doing any forms of divination, and all of that is just wild up there because there's the way the rocks have.
So wait a second. So how do you feel when you walk into an area that's just
you can tell
rife with quartz?
You can feel that energy, and I think that's. Yeah. One of the reasons why people say New Hampshire has a lot of ghost stories is because of the natural granite. New Hampshire's a granite state, and within that granite are just tons of quartz crystals that naturally
that's a component of granite?
It is. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people believe that might have something to do with why we have, so many strange things going on up there. But I figured I would mention that if you like crystals like myself, you can never seem to have enough, and I can't have enough. And Ken and I had actually gone up to Vermont a few years ago, and we gone up to a riverbed, and we found a whole bunch of garnet in an old dried up riverbed, and it was just in these big slabs of rock, and you could see all these beautiful little red garnets.
When you break it open, the garnets just they come right out.
And there's also a lot of rose quartz that you'll find up in, of course, the White Mountains and also over in Vermont as well, which is that nice kind of pink quartzy color. And it's all about love and self-love and healing. So those are some of the minerals that you'll find naturally occurring. And I just kind of thought it'd be one of the fun road trip things to do as we get into, this part of the summer. And people are like, well, what do I do now? I don't want to keep going to the beach. I want to go have an adventure.
That's part of your focus when you guys are out on trips,
hounding.
right?
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think most of us lay people just see a bunch of rocks around. We're not seeing anything in particular, but I guess if you know what you're looking
It's
for,
like
right?
what's in and among those rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, particularly up on Cathedral Ledge is a lot of amethyst. And amethyst is beautiful purple stone used for psychic development, psychic intuition, and it's found naturally occurring. Like you can find it on the ground. Not to mention, Maine, you have all the tourmaline that's up there, which is just gorgeous.
The watermelon tourmaline. Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's all pink and green.
oh, it's gorgeous. We went up to Rangeley and we stopped at a little shop up there, and they had all kinds of tourmaline. They had mine pretty much right across the street from their shop, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
So,
Oh, and on that note, one
Yes.
more thing. Did you hear?
One thing?
I read there's a movement to turn Ruggles Mine into a state park. That would be nice.
ooh, Ruggles Mine would be great. That's a perfect place to go mining for stones. I've been up there years ago, so I hope so, because there were talks about making that into a
Condos
housing
and-
development, so let's hope that doesn't happen. And with that, you can hear the music in the background, which means we are just about out of time. You can find us at NewEnglandCuriosities.com for our tours, classes, and events. If you have not been, you must come, because we know that you are wicked curious, and that's a great way to feed your curiosities, coming out with us. So thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you soon. Stay curious.
I